Hey guys, somewhere in the Simpson Desert on the way to Geo Survey Hill on top of a dune. Sunset over there, sunrise over there, cold Pacific radler. Can't get any better. Beautiful. Hey guys, Stefan Fischer here from All Off Road. Wouldn't you wish as well to be in the middle of the Simpson Desert? I certainly do. However, my next Simpson Desert trip is still 2 months away. I use the downtime though to prepare for you what is, I hope, the ultimate Simpson Desert travel guide. This is going to be a 2-part series and I will cover many subjects. If you're new to Simpson Desert Travel, I would recommend watching the whole video. However, if you've already done a few Simpson Desert trips and you just want to pick up some tips, use the chapter markers to just jump to that subjects which interest you.
The best time to travel the Simpson Desert is in Australia's winter months, June, July and August, as the temperatures are quite pleasant during the day, average in the low 20s. However, at night they can drop well below 0 degrees Celsius. Depending on the season and weather, flies can be a constant companion in the Simpson Desert, sometimes to the degree that you can't have food outside after sunset and before sundown. The general rule is that the colder the weather, the fewer the flies. So this is another reason for me to go in June, July or August. However, April, May and September are options with higher daytime temperatures and usually way more flies. I had outside temperatures of 49 degrees Celsius in October, so be aware, the further you stray from the winter months, the more elevated the temperatures. If you go early in the season, March, April, the treks are less used and usually are in better conditions. Due to extreme heat, the Simpson Desert is closed from December 1st to March 15th. Please be aware that the Think Desert Race may be on during the Queen's birthday weekend in June. I would avoid a week before and after. It can be pretty busy around that time and you have many motorbikes in the Simpson Desert. Which direction to cross? The less experienced traveler will tell you it's the easiest to cross from west to east. This is because westerly dune approaches are gentler and longer, with a shorter, steeper descent for the east-facing side. I have done many crossings in both directions and I don't think there is much difference in regards to driving it either way. The longer, gentler east-west approach are sometimes even more rutted with bigger wombat holes because a lot of people who tow use these directions for the supposed easier approach and then get stuck and dig holes anyway because of incorrect tire pressure. This often makes it more difficult than the shorter but steeper east-west approach. With the correct tire pressure and throttle control, no direction should pose any issues. Which is the best line to take? You have a few different options traversing the Simpson Desert. The most frequent and most direct Simpson crossing is via the French line. It has the highest and steepest dunes of the 3 crossings and it's usually the most scalloped and demanding trek. Not a trek you should use if you tow a camper trailer. The Rig Road used to be clay-capped by oil companies and the least demanding of the crossings. Nonetheless, I found it has significantly deteriorated over the past few years and has bad corrugation in places. If you really must tow a trailer through the Simpson Desert, that would still be the trek to use. If you start the Rig Road from the K1 line, be aware that the K1 is more challenging to cross and single vehicles and trailers are not recommended, especially west-east. The K1 line is not often used and can be challenging to locate and navigate, not for beginners. If you want to do the Rig Road, it's better to do it from the Knolls track. The Knolls track and the WAA line is similar to the French line with the same soft sandy conditions, but the dunes are a little smaller further south. When you turn west from Knolls track into the WAA line, there is a big salt lake and I have seen this twice unpassable with water in the lake. If that is the case, you can detour by heading further south on the Knolls and turn west onto the Rig Road. After 32 kilometers going west on the Rig, you can turn north into the Arabina track for 12 kilometers and then turn west into the WAA line. Make sure you have enough fuel for the detours. For any of the 3 aforementioned crossings, you should plan around 3 to 4 days in the desert. However, make sure you have a contingency plan and extra time, as the desert does not have a time schedule. The third option for more experienced travelers would be the Madigan line, which travels in the footsteps of Dr. Cecil Madigan, kind of. He was the second white person to cross the Simpson Desert. Until a few years ago, the Madigan was trackless and you needed to travel via GPS. This is not the case anymore, and the Madigan line is a well-established track nowadays. Unfortunately, the added popularity has also increased the deterioration of the track, and in 2022 it was in worse shape and more scalloped than the French line. Since 2022, the Madigan can only be travelled west-east from Old Andado Station towards Birdsville. It's around 660 kilometers without detours, and you should plan between 8 to 14 days. That means you need to carry enough fuel, water and food for the whole time. It is more remote and still less frequented than the major lines, and you will need to be 100% self-sufficient for the entire stretch. Some dunes are steep and very chopped up nowadays and will pose problems for people with inadequate low tire pressure or people towing. Recovery from the Madigan line is even more costly than from the other lines. Rob Pocaro, who kindly provided me the images to use, experienced these firsthand last year when the clutch on his patrol failed. The recovery took 6 days and was a very expensive exercise. So while you want to be well prepared for any desert trip, for the Madigan line even more so. The last main option would be the Hay River Trek, which follows the Hay River from Betten Hill in the north down south to the French line. It's a relatively easy trek, traveling in the swales along the dry riverbed of the Hay. There are a few dunes to cross, but nothing significant until you reach the French line. It's a very, very picturesque trek and quite different to a regular Simpson Desert crossing. You will need fuel for around 700 kilometers, and again that is without any detours. The last fuel stop is Jervis, a cattle station with a fuel pump. It is probably the least frequented trek, so you need to be well prepared and completely self-sufficient again. You will also need a permit from the Central Land Council to use the trek. It is definitely a worthwhile north-south crossing, but nothing I would do as your first desert crossing. So let's talk about the permits and requirements to cross the Simpson Desert. Any of the regular Simpson crossings via the French line, WAA line or Rig Road will require a Desert Parks Pass, which I recommend purchasing online beforehand or at Birdsville Information Center or Mount Dare. If you like to do the Madigan line, you require permission from the Central Land Council and Adria Downs to visit Madigan Camp 17 to 23. You can contact Don and Judy Raymond at Adria Downs at active8.net.au. Please note the Madigan line can only be done now west-east and Madigan Camp 2 to 3 cannot be visited. The Hay River Trek is located in the northern Simpson Desert and stretches from Jervis Station to Pepple's Corner. It's an excellent option with fewer dunes to cross as you follow a well-defined trek along the Hay River. Keep in mind there's hardly ever water in the Hay, so leave your dinghy at home. You need permission from the Central Land Council to travel the Hay River Trek. Please note that you also will need an approved sand flag mounted either on the front of the vehicle, recommended, or on the roof. The reason for the sand flag is to prevent head-on collisions when two cars crest a dune at the same time. The minimum size of the flag is 300 mm wide by 290 mm high. If your flag is mounted on the front of the vehicle, it must be a minimum of 3.5 meters tall, whereas roof-mounted flags are specified with a 2 meter minimum height from the roof. If you decide on a roof-mounted flag, make sure you mount the flag as far forward as possible. I have a specific video about sand flags, please check it out. How much fuel do I need? That really depends on your vehicle and setup. If you don't know how much fuel you will use in sand, I would strongly recommend a shakedown trip with your fully loaded vehicle over sand. For instance, if you are in New South Wales, drive to Stockton Beach, from Levis Lane to Anna Bay and back. See how much fuel you consumed. This will give you a good idea as the sand is quite soft there. Here are some of the distances you will need to cover. Birdsville to Mount Dare via the French line is around 550 kilometers. Birdsville to Mount Dare via the Knolls Trek, WAA and Rig Road is around 600 kilometers. The Hay River is around 660 kilometers from Birdsville to Jervis Station, and that is without any detours. The Madigan line, Birdsville to Old Andetto Station, is around 670 kilometers. Old Andetto has no fuel and it's around 100 kilometers from Old Andetto to Mount Dare, or about 130 kilometers to Fink. My Land Cruiser 105 with a 1HD FTE diesel engine fully loaded uses around 19 to 21 liters per 100 kilometers in the desert. A modern dual cab ute probably uses anywhere between 14.5 liters to 16 liters per 100 kilometers. These will increase quite a bit if you decide to tow a trailer. Please plan for various contingencies like floods or detours and carry appropriate reserves. If you don't have a long-range fuel tank and you need to carry extra fuel, ideally you carry it on a double jerry can holder at the rear of the vehicle. If that is not possible and you have a diesel vehicle, you could also consider having it inside the vehicle. Here I show you a Mark solution with a 60-liter diesel tank behind the rear seats and an external fuel pump so that you don't have the smell in the car. Alternatively, if you have no other option, store some of it on the roof, however only fill up just before you enter the desert and make sure you use them as soon as you can and empty the jerry cans into your main tank. You want to keep the load on the roof as light as possible. How much water do I need? This will again depend on your water consumption. I have a fairly fine-tuned routine and get away with 2.5 to 3 liters per day, including my drinking water, washing up and doing my low water washes in the morning. This assumes we have a typical day in the desert without recoveries or extreme physical efforts. However, on average, you need 2 to 3 liters per day to drink, on top of what you need for cooking and washing. So I would calculate based on around 5 to 7 liters per person per day. For a standard Simpson Desert crossing via the French line or Rig Road, I would plan 3 to 4 days. So for a party of 2, I would recommend 4 times 7 liters times 2 equals 56 liters and at least 3 days contingency reserve for a total of around 75 to 80 liters of water. It is advisable to spread your water storage over multiple containers, so in case you have a puncture or hole in one, you don't lose your whole water supply. In regards to storage of your drinks, be advised that drinking cans will easily rub through the aluminium due to the corrugation. So best is to protect each can with a stubby holder. Glass bottles can also break easily with the corrugations and can also be protected by stubby holders. You can either use the regular stubby holders which you often receive from brands as advertising, or alternatively MSA has a dedicated set of stubby and bottle holders which has a little bit thinner neoprene, so takes up less space, and they work very well. I carry them myself. How much food do I need? It again depends on what you want in regards to food. Some people have elaborate camp oven cook-ups daily. Keep in mind, firewood is limited, so BYO firewood and keep fire small. I have a very simple and quick approach because I usually film in the time when others start cooking. I run my Bushman fridge as a fridge-freezer combo. The bottom is frozen, but the top baskets are not, and have a combination of frozen vegetables. In this case, I usually buy them ready from the supermarket. Then I have my cryovac meat and a few dehydrated meals and some lasting fresh fruit and vegetables. I only cook one-pan meals, which reduces water consumptions for both cooking and cleanup, and I find it the easiest way to have still a good tasting and reasonably fresh meal in the desert. I would suggest creating a rough meal plan for each day. While I purchase all my essentials at home, I always make an effort to stock up with fresh stuff like milk, bread, fruit and vegetables along the way to support the smaller country towns and communities, even if it sometimes costs a little more. Just make sure you do not rely on very remote communities for your necessities, as they do not always have stock. A little tip here, I love rice, however it takes way too much water to cook it the traditional way, so microwave rice packages actually work perfect. Just put a tablespoon of water and put it in a pan and stir it with your cooking. Over the past 3 years, I really also developed a liking for dehydrated food, and in particular, I like the Reddicks and the Camper's Pantry. I'm using them now for some time, and I find it super quick to make, convenient, good tasting, and with an absolute minimum amount of wash up, because you can use the packet as a pan and also the plate, and then you only need to clean up a fork or spoon. Vehicle requirements. Do you need a highly modified four-wheel drive like mine to do a standard desert crossing? No, it just makes life quite a bit easier. It means I will have more options in extreme conditions. So for a standard Simpson crossing, I would recommend the following. Most well-maintained four-wheel drives with a low-range transfer case will do. I would recommend a 2-inch lift so you have a little more ground clearance. And a set of quality LT, which means light truck, AT, all-terrain or MT mud-terrain tires. And no, cheap Chinese knockoff AT or MT tires are not good. I would also ensure that your rim size is not above 18 inch, as you need as much sidewall as possible to air down and enlarge your footprint. I recommend the biggest tire size you can legally run on your vehicle, as it increases your footprint and will make obstacles smaller. Keep in mind that most four-wheel drives coming from the dealership are not set up to carry the maximum load over rugged terrain. Traveling on outback tracks and in the desert will be punishing for your suspension. The most important thing you can do is travel as light as possible. If this is your first desert trip in this car, I would also recommend trial packing your vehicle with everything you will be carrying, including fuel, water and people, and then test drive it over some rough roads and see how the suspension sits and behaves. This is also an excellent time to drive your vehicle over a public weight bridge and see if you are within your GVM. Has the vehicle sunk a lot when fully packed? Does the suspension bump out when you drive over speed bumps? If yes, get a suspension setup to suit the weight. And if you are over GVM, also ask for a GVM upgrade. I assume you are not doing your own servicing. I recommend bringing the car around 4 weeks before you travel to a reputable four-wheel drive mechanic and ask for a thorough desert pre-trip inspection and service. I would not just go to your local mechanic, but someone who understands the implication of outback and desert travel and does not take any shortcuts. 4 weeks before means you have time to get spare parts in or make repairs if needed. In particular, I would also have all significant suspension, fuel tank and exhaust hangers and bolts checked and torqued up according to your specifications. Make sure your wheel bearings are in good shape, and if your vehicle is a little older, I suggest getting all belts and hoses replaced and carrying the old ones as spares with you on the trip. This ensures you have spares which will fit. I recommend going for a final check and looking over the car a few days before the trip. For remote cross-country trips, I often use a second, different trusted mechanic to do that, as 4 eyes see more than 2. Which tools to carry? Again, it depends a little on your vehicle, as some vehicles like older Land Rovers require you to carry selected metric and imperial and sometimes also Whitworth spanners and sockets. I purchased a Barco 106 piece, 1/4 and 1/2 socket set several years ago, and it has served me very well. About 3 years ago, I moved it from the included bigger Barco box into a Yorktown roll, and while it takes a little longer to find what you need, it has reduced the packing size considerably, and it also makes it quite convenient to lay your tools out on the track. I did a dedicated review of the Yorktown roll some time ago, and I'm still using it with a Barco 106 piece set in each of my cars. I included links to most of the gear which are available at A247 in the description. A247 does not sponsor the video, but given they stock a lot of the gear I use, I asked them for a discount code for my subscribers, so if you spend over $100 you receive a $20 discount. I also receive a small kickback which helps the channel. In addition to the socket set, I carry a good set of screwdrivers and pliers, a solid hammer, multi-grips, fencing wire, epoxy paste, cable ties and gaffer tape. I also carry a box of electrical gear from connectors, fuses, cables, relays and Anderson plugs, as well as a gas soldering iron. I also carry a Hayes workshop manual for the cruiser and a lot of other little bits and bobs which could be helpful along the way. I of course also carry a good tire repair kit Make sure you have one with the aluminium or metal handle, not with the plastic handle. They can break off and then give you nasty injuries on your hands. And in addition to that, I carry additional tire patches and plugs. I do not carry a high lift jack anymore after carrying it for many years and never using it, not to mention that they are quite dangerous, especially if you don't use them often and don't know how to use them. However, I certainly do carry a 3-stage bottle jack which fits my car. Raised air intake. While you don't need a raised air intake, also incorrectly often called a snorkel, it will help your engine to get clean air on dusty roads, especially if you travel in convoy. Keep in mind, unless it's installed, sealed and smoke tested, it will not increase your wading depths if you do water crossings. I still carry a second air filter for extended desert trips, especially if you travel in a convoy and are not the lead vehicle. Also make sure to keep your distance in between vehicles whenever possible and it is dusty. You will need a quality air compressor to reinflate your tires according to the terrain, as running the correct tire pressure will determine how often you get stuck or not stuck. I have a fixed mounted ARB double compressor in the Land Cruiser, which I now have for over 7 years. I also use a JMAC PEM 1000 auto inflator. You can use a portable compressor, but I would stay away from very cheap and nasty ones, as they often fail in the most inopportune situations. Make sure also to carry a tire deflator and a good quality tire gauge. No! That's how that holes come. Do I need Diff Locks for a desert crossing? Diff Locks are usually not necessary, but they can be very helpful, especially if you have an IFS vehicle and or limited amount of suspension travel. Let me explain. For normal sand driving, Diff Locks are not required. However, some dunes have deep cross-axle wombat holes created by people getting stuck. With big tires and long travel suspension, like I have in the Land Cruiser, I rarely lose contact with the ground, therefore hardly ever need to use my Diff Locks. One of the rare occasions where I used both Diff Locks in the desert was when I helped Dave with his 200 series towing a non-off-road trailer and the solar buggy up the dunes. This is different though if you drive an IFS vehicle with less suspension travel and smaller tires. If you are caught up in one of these washouts, a locker will help you to keep forward momentum and travel over the distance one wheel loses contact with the ground. Traction control will try to achieve the same, but it is a reactive system, which means you will need to drive through wheel spin, which creates bigger holes and may require more attempts and more speed. So to conclude, you don't need Diff Locks for a desert crossing, but it is the single best modification you can do to any four-wheel drive to increase your overall off-road capabilities. A UHF radio is mandatory in the Simpson Desert. I would recommend a 5-watt fixed installed UHF with a 6 to 9 dBi antenna. I use a GME XRS 370 as well as an ICOM P400 Pro in-cab fixed installed. This allows me to have one radio on the designated desert channel on channel 10 and the second radio on a different channel to communicate within our group. In the desert, I run a GME 6.6 dBi antenna. I also carry a 5-watt GME TX 6600 handheld unit as a backup and for recoveries or spotting. If I travel with the kids, I also take a set of bright yellow GME 6160 5-watt UHFs for the kids. If the kids leave camp in the desert or bush, they have to carry a UHF with them for safety because it is very easy to get lost in the desert among the dunes. Emergency communication and first aid. As part of your emergency contingency plans, you should carry a PLB, personal locator beacon, as an absolute minimum. I would also recommend a satellite phone, as it allows you to get weather forecasts as well as to receive advice, be it medical or mechanical. The PLB is for life and death emergencies, and the satellite phone is for everything else. If you don't want to purchase a satellite phone, there are quite a few places where you can rent one for your trip. I carry a Thuraya satellite phone on a $16 plan with an Australian mobile number, so people can call me for the cost of an Australian mobile phone call, which is usually free. I also have a GME MT610G PLB in my car. Make sure everyone in your group knows the location of the PLB and how to operate it. For instance, my kids know where the PLB is and they both know how to operate as well. I have a second PLB in my hiking grab bag simply for the fact that I don't like to swap stuff around.
So good example why I don't recommend having a Spot or Garmin InReach or whatever as your main PLB. That is my Spot 3, older model, worked perfectly fine though. I had to do a firmware update, and after that firmware update now the Spot pretty much stops working. Or it does work, but it acquires no GPS signal. From time to time it does, but then it loses it right away. So really it has become useless. I paid now nearly $100 to reactivate it and have it going for a month or two. And now it has a GPS, which is good, so it will send the location. But within the next half an hour, it will drop the GPS and it will not reacquire it.
If money is no issue, I think having a Spot 3, a Zoleo or Garmin InReach is great as an additional tool. The Zoleo and InReach has two-way communication, so you can message to and from. However, there are few disadvantages using them as a PLB. So unless I'm hiking and space and weight is at an absolute premium, I think that a dedicated PLB and a satellite phone on a low monthly plan is value for money, a much better option, and a satellite phone is far more useful than texting via a Zoleo or Garmin InReach. A comprehensive first aid kit should always be in your car, as well as a snakebite kit. I have used the Survival Solution first aid and snakebite kits for years now and find them excellent organized in a sturdy water repellent bag. The items and compartments are labeled and numbered and have QR codes so you can quickly restock used items. It is essential to have a valid first aid certificate to provide first aid if required. Just the first aid kit itself does not do the job. If you travel more often, I recommend a remote first aid course that goes more in depth. For remote travel, it's not just about first aid, but also keeping someone alive until help arrives. And depending on where you are, these can take time. As a group, you should be well prepared to deal with most eventualities in the desert, as outside help is hard to get and very expensive. However, if you travel solo and have a breakdown you can't fix, make sure to open the bonnet of your car, which is a universal sign that something is wrong, and always stay with your vehicle. If you are on any of the regular lines, you should see a few vehicles each day, but in a worst case scenario, at least a vehicle every few days. Hence, make sure you have extra water and supplies. Hopefully, the passers-by can help you. If you have a satellite phone, speak to Mount Dare or Birdsville Police. If you genuinely believe your life is in danger, set off the PLB, but be aware that triggers a costly search and rescue and should be the absolute last resort. As I said before, always stay with your vehicle. It's much easier for rescue services to locate a vehicle than a person. Have a ground Charly. A ground Charly is a trusted and reliable friend or family member not traveling with you. Ideally, he also four-wheel drives and knows about outback travel. Leave your itinerary with him and when possible, keep him up to date with your travels. Definitely let him know before you leave Birdsville or Mount Dare and when you are expected to be in contact again. He's the one who would start a search and rescue if you are more than a few days overdue. My ground Charly often is my good friend Dennis Battelle, also called the Desert Walker. He has done over 60 Simpson Desert crossings. How many spare tires and rims do you need? A good question, and one where you often get very different opinions. Many old school guys who still think the tire construction hasn't changed in the past 30 years will tell you that you need 2 spares. In my experience, good quality modern mud-terrain tires are very robust and can be repaired, at least temporarily in most cases. I'm running the BFG KM3 and never had a catastrophic tire failure in my 9 years of hard touring. I only ever had 3 punctures, and they all happened on the same BFG KM3 tire on the same cross-country trip where we overall had 14 punctures. I repaired all 3 sidewall punctures and still drove the car home on the repaired tire. My conclusion is to carry 1 full spare LT empty tire and wheel, not an old, nearly bald tire you kept as a spare, but the same quality and age as your running tires. In addition, I carry a complete tire repair kit with extra plugs and tire patches, and if you can, also get a tire tube. If I go very remote, I sometimes carry a second tire carcass on the roof without the wheel. If you do so, ensure you have tire levers so you can switch tires on the same rim. I also suggest doing a test tire change at home in the driveway before your trip to ensure you have all the necessary tools and a working jack. I can't tell you how often I encountered people on the 4-wheel drive courses that did not have all equipment to change a tire on their own car.
Yeah guys, this is the end of part 1. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please make sure you share, like and subscribe. That helps with the YouTube algorithm and gets the video found a bit easier. Also, if you like my work, I would greatly appreciate if you could head over to Patreon or to buy me a coffee and support me with the equivalent of a cup of coffee or 2 per month. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, do it right now so you get a notification when part 2 of this Simpson Desert 101 video is out.